South Node patterning holds clues about our childhood, and also about, if you believe in reincarnation, about past lives as well. So for me, it was incredibly helpful to learn about that and to just quite literally in real time course correct. So I can tell when I'm in that very controlling space that there's a part of me that doesn't feel safe. I need to attune to that part. I need to access that part. And then I can lean into this Piscean flow. And I can feel when I'm in my Pisces North Node, it's like, it's heavenly, you know?
Guys, welcome back to the Evergreen RX. I'm your host, Hayden, licensed mental health therapist, Cancer Moon, and the first to get deep at any party. And I am so excited to welcome today's guest. Today, we're joined by Ali Ofstedal. She is an intuitive healer and evolutionary astrologer. She really loves to help women connect to their soul blueprint using astrology, quantum healing, and somatic practices. She is also the amazing host of the Soul Archaeology podcast, which provides education and energy reports and everything you need to know about upcoming astrology and how it might impact you and what it means. So I, found Ali through listening and becoming a fan of her podcast. So I'm so excited to have her come on to mine today.
Thank you for having me. I love that little piece about being the first one to go deep at a party.
That's the thing. It always sticks out to them. And I'm like, yeah, I think that is true. I love to dive into the deep end on topics. So
Yeah, I love that.
I'm excited to do it today about, talking before we got on here. I was telling Ali a little bit like through my own journey with astrology and learning and seeing so much of the value that it can have into our understanding of ourselves and into our day-to-day life. I've had questions about, how do we funnel all of this guidance down into the more mundane, the everyday, and also how do we kind of square it with all of the other information that we may have, whether that be our own astrological chart, the season we're in, the area we live in, all of these other rhythms that we have going on in our life at any given time. So I really am curious to talk today about, all these messages that we're always getting from the universe or the cosmos that are really mirroring our reality, and how we can, use that information, that astrological weather, to help us and to guide our life or be a helpful assistant. And so, yeah, as we were talking before too, there's just such a surplus of data in the astrology world alone. So just in your opinion, I kind of would love to know, where do you think we should start, when it comes to our own soul blueprint in terms of our own chart, and then also with just the larger energies at play in general? What do you think are like the key players to look at?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think it's the best way to really understand and learn astrology is to study your own chart. So if you're someone who's like naturally drawn to it, you'll know. If you are naturally drawn to astrology, you'll know. It just kind of like pulls you in. It's like this magnetic force that just draws you in. And that's certainly how I began. I just felt all of these past life activations happening when I first started studying it, and just all of these lifetimes I had lived, studying and teaching astrology. And so it's, if you're drawn to it, I highly recommend just diving into your own personal chart, and learning as much as you can about your own natal placements, because we all have our own personal chart, right? We have our soul blueprint, which is essentially the snapshot of the sky when we're born. And it tells us, it holds all of the information that we need to navigate this lifetime. So all of the information that we need to unlock, little keys, codes that we need to unlock within this life to really evolve and grow in the ways that we're meant to when we come here. And so I love it because it's a system. So you sort of look at it and it looks like this map in a way, or it looks like, this coded system. I don't even know how to describe it, but when you start to really get deeper, it holds all of these different layers. So it can be overwhelming to think about beginning, like how do I even start? Where do I start? obviously, most of us know what our sun sign is because it's the same all the time, and it doesn't really change. If you're born between these specific dates, you're a Leo. And so the sun sign is a great place to start because it starts to build that language a little bit. You start to get to know and understand what the signs mean.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, I mean, I think I personally like to go then from the sun to the moon because it gives us a sort of, it starts to build like a map, or starts to
Mm-hmm.
build this picture of who we are internally and
Mm-hmm.
externally. The moon is our internal space. So the moon is really important to understand. And I think a lot of people, especially if you're listening to this and you don't identify with your sun sign, I really encourage you to look at your moon,
Mm-hmm.
because the moon holds so much wisdom, and it really reveals our internal landscape, our feminine side. The moon is feminine and reveals to us our emotional landscape. So maybe not what we reveal to others or how others experience us as much as how we experience ourselves. And
Mm-hmm.
for myself, understanding my moon sign was really pivotal in my journey, because I started to understand why I do what I do, essentially.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, this is really the internal operating system is held in the
Yeah. What
moon.
makes you like tick, kind of.
Totally. And I mean, all the other planets do that too. We have personal planets, which are the inner planets, and they're, connected to more of our like day-to-day lives. They
Mm-hmm.
really shape and form our personality in a very tangible way. And then the outer planets kind of shape our larger life themes, our evolutionary themes. So, speaking as far as evolutionary astrology, and what I really work with clients on, is I'm always looking at the sun, the moon, Mercury, which is how we communicate and interact with the world, Venus, especially. And then I love to look at the north and south node. The outer planets start to get into more of they sort of create like a generational landscape. And those are really helpful as well, because I do work with women from, their 20s to all the way to their 60s and 70s. So it's nice to know what those outer planets are doing. But the internal planets, the inner planets, really give us an idea of why are they here? What are you here to learn, to heal through, to
Mm-hmm.
grow through? It helps us gain perspective around the evolutionary lessons we're here to learn and what
Yeah.
those look like and when they're happening. So it gives us so much information. And in the containers I work with in women, I work in like 3 and 6 month containers with women, and we're always looking at the astrology to help us map out what we're working on, and also the timing as well.
Yeah. So, and when you're talking about those inner and outer planets, just for anybody that doesn't know, like if you looked up the solar system, a photo or something of kind of the planets that are closest to us and then starting to move further out, that's kind of what you mean
Yeah.
by the inner and outer. So, outer starts to get into that's like Neptune, Saturn,
Yeah. So
Uranus, Pluto. Is that the
yeah, so Saturn, Jupiter,
Jupiter? Okay.
Uranus,
Yeah.
Neptune,
Okay.
Pluto. They're basically up until, a few hundred years ago, we only knew about
Yeah.
Saturn. Saturn was the furthest. So in traditional astrology, where people are really working with like that first layer of
Hmm.
planetary,
Hmm.
celestial bodies. And then we discovered all of these new planets. So they kind of create more of a story. They start to shape and form more of a story. And the planets really, to break down the chart a little bit, we have this birth chart that's living and breathing. It's always moving and sort of shifting within us. How we interact with the world changes our birth chart, even though it's pretty, it's firm as far as what it is and how it will be throughout our lifetime. How we interact
Hmm.
with it changes ideally. And so the planets, so we have the signs which tell us, it sort of gives us a flavor of what we're talking about.
Hmm.
The planets tell us what we're talking about. So what
Yeah.
part of our lives, or what part of our personality, I should say, we're talking about. The signs tell us, like, gives like sort of a color or shape or a form to those planetary placements. And then the houses tell us where. So the houses tell us where in our lives it lands. So you can really start with the basics And I would encourage people to, if they're wanting to study their chart, to start with one planet and to really like work from there. So maybe starting with the sun and then looking where the sun is located in your chart, what sign it lands in, and then
Mm-hmm.
looking at the house. So you start to form this story essentially. And this story tells you what you're here to do, you know, how you're here to work with that energy. We all get these placements for a very specific reason, and it's to give us the opportunities in this lifetime to grow and evolve and shift in the ways we're meant to here.
So let's just say, like, to kind of bring an example to anybody whose mind kind of works this way, there's like these sentences in astrology, right? That's kind of how I've heard it described, like the what you're saying, like the what, the where, the how. So if
Yeah.
somebody had their sun sign in Pisces in the ninth house, can you kind of just give a quick example of breaking down what you were just explaining about each of those elements of it?
Yeah. So the sun is our ego. It's our personality. It's what people really experience from us, you know, and it kind of is, it's the center of the solar system. So in many ways, it's the center of who we are in this body. So the sun in Pisces is it's a 12th sign of the zodiac. So when we think about it from through an evolutionary lens, Pisces have been many places. Pisces are oftentimes old souls, not
Mm,
all of them, but they're oftentimes here to really do some complex soul work. Pisces is a water sign. It's a mutable water sign. So it's here to move and flow and experience a lot of different emotional layers. They're oftentimes empaths. So you can tell like the sun, we're sort of identifying, okay, the sun rules this part of who we are.
yeah.
Then we add the how it expresses. It's through a Piscean lens. So it's through
Hmm.
this more emotive, emotional, intuitive, formless type of nature. You know, Pisces it doesn't really contain a lot of form. It's mutable. So it's always changing and evolving. And then we add in where in our life we'll notice this energy really fully expressed. The ninth house, that's the house of higher learning, teaching, travel. It's a house of Sagittarius, and Sagittarius is a very spiritual and expansive sign. So that house is really about learning deeply. It's about teaching.
Mm.
It's about evolving and growing in a lot of ways, up leveling as far as a spirit in, you know, through a spiritual lens.
Yeah, so helpful. And I think for anybody listening, whether they have some experience in astrology or very little, it's easy to hear how quickly complicated
Yeah.
this can get. And so with all that information and even, adding in something we haven't even touched on yet, like there's aspects that planets make to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And then the moon phase kind of matters and retrogrades and the way the planets are, you know, interacting with each other at any given time. All of this, it's so big, but if you could take some of that and really speak to how we can prioritize and apply some of these insights to our daily life without getting overwhelmed, you know, what would you say? Imagining that this is someone that maybe takes some time and spends time getting to know their own personal chart and familiarizing with some of this language and these planets and what they symbolize, things like that. Then how do we add in the layer of the astrological weather of a given time period that we're in?
Yeah. So we all have our natal chart, you know, and that's set. That's kind of, it's who we are. It essentially shows us our soul blueprint. So what we came here to be.
Hmm.
We always have free will. So we can always choose how we're interacting with it. We can always choose to work with it or to work against it to kind of create more ease or more flow or more challenge and difficulty in our lives. We also have the sky that's constantly changing. You know, we
Hmm.
have our universe that's always shifting. And everything in astrology is from the perspective of Earth. So, astrology is basically looking at how the planets interact with this physical experience here. So that's why the sun is part of it as well. It's a luminary. The moon is part of it as well. Even though they're not planets, they're part of this whole story. So, with the changing astrological weather that we always have, what we're looking at is how does that interact with your own natal chart, your own
Hmm.
personal soul
Hmm.
blueprint. So, because we carry all of these different codes and stories within us, about where we've been and where we're headed. What we see with the current sky is just another added layer of what does that mean for us? So, for example, if we have a full moon in Pisces, that person with their sun in Pisces in the ninth house is going to have a full moon or a full illumination of the Piscean themes in their ninth
Mm.
house of higher learning,
Mhm.
teaching, travel. So you can kind of see how we basically want to look at whatever's happening in the sky. It gets placed into our own natal chart
Mhm.
based upon where there's an opening, like where Pisces lands for you,
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought up kind of the idea of the full moon, or I know with new moons and stuff, and I feel like there's kind of collectively, I don't know if this is just my world or not, but it feels like there's more of an energy going towards people paying attention to the moon, paying attention to these full moons and new moons, and you know farmers have given them names that people hear about more often, like a wolf moon or things like that.
Yeah.
um and it seems like that is such an obvious thing we can observe in our night sky at any given time. And you can watch as the moon goes throughout its, 28-day cycle. And I wonder if that feels like a good place for someone to really have this more clear, definable marker that's kind of like, okay, just take this one thing that's going on and what, a full moon represents versus what a new moon represents, and then just place that into your understanding of your chart and see, like, well, how is that feeling? What ideas are coming to you, or what that experience is like? Because it just seems like more of a kind of clear and obvious influence, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, I think the moon is a beautiful place to start for people. I mean, it's something that we can track, and similarly with the sun, we can track the seasons, so that's something as well that can be helpful too.
Mm-hmm.
But the moon it's very feminine. It's oftentimes, because of the world we live in, it's something that has been carved out of our Western world, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, our ancestors from all the different cultures have been honoring the moon and the feminine for thousands of years. And so in the few last 100 years that we've kind of modernized, we've carved it out of our daily lives. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a beautiful way to integrate um, not only our internal experience, but our feminine, our
Yeah.
emotional experience, to understand, someone who's a Cancer moon, for example, you have a completely different emotional experience than other people because it ebbs and flows with the moon. Essentially, that's
Mm-hmm.
where the moon is at home in Cancer, and so you're going to have this heightened um, intuitive connection to your emotional landscape, that some other people might not have given their moon placement. And so, yeah, I think the moon's a beautiful a place to start. And it's oftentimes something that's overlooked because it's connected to the feminine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that lens that you're adding to it, because that also kind of brings me to another, you know, um, question that I'm always thinking about, and tend to always be talking about on this podcast, which is the effect of, personal cycles, things. And I use personal loosely because I'm thinking about, seasonal shifts as well, but obviously it is personal to where you live in the world. But including, menstrual cycles, life transitions, those kind of personal, like, waves that we go through. How do you navigate those personal experiences? And maybe like it's a full moon outside when you're actually in your kind of like new moon phase of your cycle or something like this, or you're starting something new. How do you kind of get those pieces all to work together? And especially when sometimes the cosmic influence seems a little bit at odds with your own personal experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to always note that we have free will. We can choose how we want to interact with this information. And I've definitely seen it where people have gotten so sucked into it that they actually lose touch with their sense of power and free will,
Mm-hmm.
that we have. And then I've seen it the total opposite direction where people are just completely gripping to, how they want things to be and the plans and the expectations that they've laid out for how their life will unfold, and even just like down to, daily things that they'd like to complete. So I think there's a beautiful middle space there, and it's having awareness around what's happening and what's occurring, but also always remembering that you have
Mm,
free will, and you're an empowered being that can choose how to interact with this energy.
mm-hmm.
I think sometimes we can fall into victim consciousness when we think about astrology, because it's like, oh, this is happening to me and I can't do anything about it. And it's like, no, it's just like the weather. There's an energetic climate at play. We can
Mm-hmm.
choose to go outside with an umbrella and work with it and embrace it. And sort of like, I like to go for hikes when we have rain here in LA. I love that. It's my favorite thing to do. But other people are like, this is my time to go inward. So we get to choose how to really interact with it. There's a lot of power in understanding these transits. And number one, understanding ourselves and how we're wired, and also understanding these transits, which means like what the planets are currently doing essentially, because it's empowering as well to understand why and to plan. Like as an astrologer, I'm planning 12 months out based on the astrology, because I know what's a good time to launch certain things, what's a good time
Yeah.
to be more extroverted, more outward, more communicative, and when I really want to be inward and kind of sort of cocoon. We're in a Mars retrograde now, so I've been trying to launch a course for like 3 months, and I'm like, what am I doing? I know that it's Mars retrograde. Every time I try, I get this, this
Mm-hmm.
pivot that comes in. So it's essentially, we want to work with the energy. So we
Yeah.
want to use it as a tool to plan certain things, and to also let go of control a little bit. We're in a South Node in Virgo, North Node in Pisces time. It's going to ask for us to surrender control over and over and over again over the next 20 months. We're just going to have
Mm.
to learn how to sort of embrace that, you know?
I'm really glad that you mentioned that too, because I think one of the big things that really started to draw me in to learning more about astrology outside of just my own chart that I had more understanding of, but really paying attention to the current sky, is that it's so validating. Like it can be
Mm-hmm.
really validating to be like, why is this so hard? And then I actually, at the place that I work, our admin who I see every day when I come in, she is an astrologer, so she knows a lot about it. And I'll just be like, girl, like, why am I just struggling today? And she's like, oh, it's because your blah, blah, blah is in this house. And this is like, aspecting with it or whatever. And I'm like, wow, thank you. Like now I think there is a bit of that release of control too. I like the balance of, yeah, we have free will and we can choose what we do with this stuff, but also there are these forces at play that can maybe, make you feel um less alone in what you're dealing with, or just like, oh, this is why, this is another example of how cyclical we are, that you can't expect the same thing from yourself all of the time. And I think that's like in the productive hustle culture kind of mindset, that's really the overarching story of it, is like, why are you not hitting the exact same marks every single day and then leveling up on those and just outdoing yourself?
Yeah.
um and it's just, life doesn't work that way.
It's so true. It is. And I think there's a beautiful balance between honoring cycles and honoring, the rhythms of life, and sort of like being in flow with the current, and also asserting our will
Mm-hmm.
as well. Like there needs to be a beautiful balance between that, and understanding like when is a good time to apply that will, and when is a good time to sort of sit back and be open to where you're being carried. And we see that even like in the eclipse, talking about lunar cycles, we see that through the eclipse seasons. That's not a great time to start new things or to like force things through. It's a time to really kind of sit and sort of
Mm-hmm.
wait and watch how things play out, because we're receiving this injection of divine guidance during those periods of time. They're very
Mm-hmm.
karmic. So we're receiving what we need to. And if we try to sort of force things to go a certain way, I think also oftentimes forcing and controlling things creates more suffering, because so often there's a more divine plan that wants to play out, and we kind of have to just trust it. So it's a balance. I think but it
Mm-hmm.
can also, speaking to what you said earlier, what one thing I loved about astrology and when I first started studying it was how much permission it gave me to just be who I am.
Mm.
Um, and also saying, okay, this is how I'm wired, but this is how I can embrace the highest expression of that,
Yep.
because I don't want to just stay stagnant in this life. I'm here to grow and evolve. And um, so that's another beautiful part of it as well.
Yeah, and bring, like you say, with the soul blueprint, or like our own kind of fingerprint that we have on this, world in the time that we're here, like bringing that specific energy that only you can bring into the world. And, I think that that's really special too. And I like that you use the word permission, because there is a level of permission of like, oh, all these things in my chart, maybe like they all point to this type of career, or this type of way of interacting in the world and communicating, sharing my ideas. Like maybe I can just lean into that, and like it it feels more natural. There is more flow, and maybe it's okay to just, like be exactly that blueprint that I'm meant to be, which sounds so simple, but I think a lot of us struggle with that idea and try to kind of shapeshift and be someone else. Um,
Totally.
and I wonder how, probably with your kind of advanced understanding in astrology, it's easier for you to kind of take all these different pieces and put them together and find the themes. But I think a big thing with everything we're talking about is distilling down a lot that's going on, because typically there's quite a few things going on astrologically. And, when we get into things like houses or the planets that rule certain things, you start to layer all of these pieces together. And I wonder how you like to kind of find the through line, or maybe how you kind of listen in to what the dominant theme or idea is.
Yeah, it's a great question. My answer is it's very intuitive.
Mm,
It's very intuitive. There's a lot of channeling when I'm in session with someone. I typically see, like, I start getting downloads about their chart and about who they are before we even get on the call, because I'm opening this circle. I'm kind of like creating this space, the container for our session. So I start receiving these little like downloads that come in. Sometimes I even get people's, loved ones in spirit that come through. It just kind of depends, but there's a lot of intuitive downloads that come through, and then that really instructs how the session goes.
mm,
So what I usually see is I kind of see a story start to just like almost like come out. It starts to like pull out towards me when
mm,
I look at their chart, and I can see like the major themes in their life. So what they came here to really do, what they came here to learn, heal, grow through, the people and the relationships they're meant to have. And then from there, it starts to just tell a story, So it's a beautiful like journey between me and the person, me and the client, and
mm,
what they're sharing and what we're collaborating on. But ideally, like they're leaving that session feeling more validated, more empowered, more compassionate, and yeah, more empowered to sort of make decisions that work in
mm.
flow with their chart. Um, there's a lot of healing that typically happens just by like acknowledging these certain pieces and parts of who they are. That can open up this key, this sort of gateway to healing that aspect of them. And I see them oftentimes they take that into other sessions with me or into therapy sessions. And so it's really fun to see that. Um, Now when I'm talking about like collective energy, in the podcast, like the major themes, I can just once again kind of open that space for channeling and really
Mm,
letting like the things that want to be shared come through.
mm,
There's a lot of channeling in my podcast that I do, and I love it because it's, you know, like in the last episode, one of the major themes that was, it was just Jupiter direct that's going to happen this week. It's like, that's a big significant shift because it's moving a lot of other things forward. But what really wanted to be talked about was the North Node and Neptune conjunction in Pisces. And so that's what
mm,
came through. And that was really what wanted to be shared. And I just trust it, trusting that I
mm.
think energetically what comes through for people, what comes through for a collective is really it's really meant to land for each person individually in a different
Yeah.
way. But yeah, and the other thing too is like every astrologer is very different, so we
Mhm.
all have our own channel, we all have our own languaging. There are many different types of astrology systems. There's Vedic, there's sidereal, there's evolutionary astrology, there's Western traditional, all of these different types. And so all of those have their own way of reading the chart.
Yeah.
So it's just important to, yeah, like connect with someone who you really align with, who, you feel in resonance with.
Yeah, I think it's so cool because there's such a rich history with astrology. I mean, it's been around almost as long as humankind, and
Yeah,
like
it's ancient.
um yeah, it's ancient, and there's so many different kind of schools of thought that have all evolved over time, and I think that's why it can be so resonant with people, because there's so much history there. And I just get this image when you're talking, throughout this whole podcast. It makes me kind of think about a metaphor that my therapist used to use with me a lot about like being in a canoe and going on, you're going down a river or something, and you have an oar or paddle or whatever, so you get to steer, you get to control, but you're working with the water, and you can turn your canoe around and you can try to go upstream, and you're welcome to do that. It's just going to be a lot of work when you could just kind of turn it around and flow downstream and see, the ways that you want to guide and go more in that flow. And I just kind of see that with everything you're talking about here too. Like,
Yeah.
um, this is just another way to access that ease in our life that is available if we, are able to learn more about ourselves, learn more about what's going on in the world around us, and just see if we want to utilize it to our advantage,
Yeah.
and be able to kind of get where we want to go, get further faster a lot of times because we have that cosmic assistance, basically.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that, there are no mistakes. We can choose many, there are many different options and many different paths we can take. Some are more direct and clear and sort of in, easeful and in flow, and others are more difficult. We always end where we need to, I believe, but those, yeah, what's cool about astrology is it can kind of give you a very clear path. That's why I
Mm-hmm.
love working with the North and South Node, is because they give you a very clear linear path when it comes to aligning in your life, aligning with your higher self, aligning with, that more easeful path. So
Mm-hmm.
it's that's one tool that I feel like is super underutilized in astrology, and it's really, really fascinating to work with.
Yeah, you get to skip a little bit of the guesswork that I'm
Totally.
probably doing a lot of times with clients, in therapy, is like there's
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
much
I'm
kind of
actually
guesswork.
right. I've created a course. This is what I'm trying to launch right now, but it's a course essentially to learn how to work with your own personal North and South Node, and then how practitioners can work with their clients as well. Like
Love.
just learning that one piece of astrology can be completely life changing. It changed my entire life learning that.
Wow.
I was in my Saturn return and I was like, oh my gosh, if I would have known this 5 years ago, I would have had so much less suffering, And so it's extremely helpful.
Yeah, I love that you're sharing that. And I wonder if there's any like kind of specific example through that whole transformation that you went through that could maybe kind of illustrate for people how helpful this can be to learn about.
Yeah. So with my own personal experience, I'm a South node in Virgo and a North node in Pisces. So those are my nodes, and the nodes are always opposite one of one another. So we're looking to really balance them. So I grew up um, and was very controlling. Like that was really my patterning. That was my defense mechanism, was to create some sort of control in my life in order to feel safe. And so
Mm,
um, yeah, I lived in a very sort of like rigid, almost linear way for most of my life until I hit my Saturn return and everything fell apart and I couldn't anymore. Um, but I'd always felt this sort of like pull and call to this experience of healing and um, feeling just more free. Virgo
mm,
South Node is very rigid. Like the idea is that our south node carries our shadow. So it
Mhm.
tells us where we've been so many times. We've lived so many lives or lived our whole childhood in that type of like Virgo shadow, for example.
Mhm.
And so Virgo shadow is controlling, and it can be quite rigid, and it can have really high expectations. It can be a perfectionist. It can want things to be a very certain way, once again, to feel more in control. So all of our south node patterning holds clues about our childhood, and also about, if you believe in reincarnation, about past lives as well. So for me, it was incredibly helpful to learn about that, and to just quite literally in real time course correct. So I
Mm.
can tell when I'm in that very controlling space that there's a part of me that doesn't feel safe. I need to attune to that part. I need to access that part. And then I can lean into this Piscean flow. And I can feel when I'm in my Pisces North Node, it's like, it's heavenly, you know? It
Mm.
also really informed my path as a practitioner and a healer as well, because was, I was very much more on this like Virgo track in my life. And when I got derailed really hard. And it forced me into this healing world and into the world of, spirituality and deepening into the soul work in a bigger way. And that is my destiny. The North Node is our path. It's our destiny. And so for me, knowing as long as I'm staying in alignment with that North Node in Pisces, I'm good. I can feel when I'm coming out of alignment, when I'm in that more controlling Virgo state. And it's just fascinating to kind of track and watch how it
That is
works.
fascinating. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that so much because, I have some familiarity with the North and South Node, and they, intuitively, they sound very helpful. Like when you learn, you're like, oh my God, this is the things that like maybe I could let go of a little bit, and then the things I can move towards. That
Yeah.
sounds like a helpful guide. But the way you described that really brings it into a different level for me, and hopefully people listening, of like, even just that feeling of like, oh, starting to get to know, oh, I can feel when I'm in more of that flow, and in that, for you, like that Piscean energy. And that, I love
Yeah.
that you use that word heavenly, like really getting to know that feeling for yourself and using that as your compass. Because that's what we're all
Yes.
looking for, right? Like
Yeah.
we want that compass to kind of know, am I on the right track? Like in a more grand purpose sense, am I on the right track with what
Yeah.
what I'm here to be doing?
Yeah.
So I love that you shared that. I think that's so helpful. And I wonder, just additionally for people that are curious about getting more in tune with all of this as they've listened to us talk and maybe want to tune in with some kind of daily or weekly practice or ritual or, a way to do this kind of astrological type of check-in
Yeah.
as well as the other, wellness check-ins we tend to do. Well, what's your guidance? What are things you like to do, or what are things that you like to share maybe with people that you work with on being able to connect?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. As far as your chart, I mean, I think it's beautiful just to kind of like, just to check it as often as you feel called to. I mean, doesn't have to be every day, but just kind of checking in and looking at what's happening in your chart. Like, where is the sun landing currently in your chart? Like, how do
Mhm.
you feel? How do you interact with it? I think anytime we bring awareness, consciousness, intention to what we're doing and what we're feeling and experiencing, it can be very healing.
Mhm.
So maybe just tracking. I think the moon is a great place to start. You mentioned that. So maybe just tracking the moon like all the way through your chart. So it takes 28 and a half days for the moon to move through. So if we think about that, it's like, okay, well, um, let's look at where the moon is moving through your chart. The moon is a great
Mhm.
one because it can happen in a short period of time. You can track a full cycle, right? So it's like,
Mhm.
to track a full lunar cycle through your chart can be very fascinating. It can give you a lot of insight into what you're feeling and experiencing.
Mm.
The moon changing signs through your chart. That might be a fun practice, for someone who's really
Mhm.
wanting to start to like deepen into astrology. And then you'll notice, your own personal moon, kind of sitting with the experience of how the moon moves through the chart and how it interacts with your own natal moon.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
So,
can be
because
really
with
fun.
that kind of, as I say at the beginning of every episode, I'm a Cancer moon. So my moon, my personal moon, it's always in Cancer. It's never moving
Hmm.
from there. That's my snapshot. But then what you're saying is the moon moving through the sky, uh, is every 2 or so days changing signs. So
Yeah.
I could go look at my chart and see, okay, the moon right now, let's just say it's in Aquarius. Where is Aquarius in my chart? What other planets are in that area? What house is this in? Is that kind of
Yep.
how we'd be looking at it and seeing, like, okay, maybe if it's in the house of relationships and um, things like that, is the moon being in that sign, in which is in this house for me, how is it affecting my relationships? Like, is there a
Yeah.
certain vibe that it's bringing to that aspect, that and how it shows up specifically in my life and in
Yeah.
what area of my life?
Exactly. Yeah, that's
Okay.
the really a great way to say it. We all have Aquarius in our chart. We all have every single sign somewhere.
Hmm.
Even if we don't have a placement or a planet there, there's a
Hmm.
house that holds that energy. So, yeah, I think it's the moon can be a really great one to track and to first maybe just tune in with how you're feeling and what you're experiencing,
Hmm.
and then check your astrology because sometimes I think it can inform us around how we're feeling. So I
Hmm.
always like to check in first and just intuitively how I'm feeling and sensing and what I'm experiencing, and then checking that with the astrology because it can be so confirming and supportive, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like a helpful way to learn, because if we start to see, oh wow, this really does kind of line up with my experience of this time, and
Yeah.
then I go see and it continues to be kind of reflected then in what, sign the moon is in or whatever, then we really can grow from there. I love that. I definitely want to start doing that. Hopefully, if anybody listening starts doing that and they want to reach out to me about what they're finding out or how it's
Yeah.
impacting their life, that would be awesome. And I just think everything that you talked about is so helpful, and clarifying, and I think really inspiring in a way. Like, this is just such a powerful tool, and the way that you talk about it and your understanding of it is just very clear and um, rooted in a lot of ways. And so I'm just so grateful to have this conversation with you.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I love astrology. I love talking about it. I love sharing and having conversations with others who are lit up about it and excited about it. I mean, I think it's important to note that this is much older than we are. You know, this is an ancient
Hmm.
practice and it's woven
Hmm.
into ourselves. Like it's a knowing that we've had, through our ancestry. And so it's just this awakening of it again, I think is really, really beautiful and powerful. And so I'm so
Hmm.
happy. Yeah, happy to talk about it. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Yeah, I think when we anybody goes out and looks up at the night sky and sees the stars and is just reminded of, like, oh, of course, all of this is so deeply in our bones, because
Yeah.
we've had, centuries of ancestors looking up at those same stars and trying to make sense of everything from that. So, where can people find you? I would love,
Yeah.
I'm going to have it all linked in the show notes for anybody that wants to listen to your podcast or work with you, but
Yeah.
give me your info.
Thank
What do
you.
you want people to know?
Yeah. So my podcast, Soul Archaeology, is a really great place to stay up to date on what's happening. And I do every Monday, I release an energy report. So they're like little 30, 45 minute episodes. And then my Instagram is a really great way. It's just what I've kind of like honed in on as far as sharing. It projects to TikTok as well. I don't love TikTok as much because it freaks me out, but I'm there too.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
TikTok is your thing, you can find me there as well, but I'm not as active on there. And then my website is alioffsedal.com. And that has my sessions. I do offer astrology sessions. I have a mentorship container, which is
Mm.
the 3 to 6 month journey together, and
Mhm.
it's weaving evolutionary astrology with healing. So we're working on the deep subconscious layers and kind of working with the chart to unlock some of these pieces and parts. And then yeah, and then I'll be releasing my North and South Node course in hopefully soon. I'm just going to say that
Yes.
on here, hopefully the next few weeks. And then
Yeah.
I'm working on an astrology 101 course for this summer. So
Awesome. Exciting.
yeah.
So many good ways to connect with you. I'm definitely looking
Yeah.
forward to listening to your new episode that came out today. So,
Thank you.
um, Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. Please, if this helped you and you feel compelled to share it with anybody in your life that you want to continue the conversation with, that would be wonderful. And yeah, be sure to connect with Allie, and I'll catch you guys in the last episode of the season next week.
Oh,
All right.
thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.